I'm super excited today to be supporting you with ways to use NLP to feel less anxious, ways to use neuro-linguistic programming to feel less anxious. So as always, I think I say this every single week. I've got my notes in front of me to make sure that I stay focused and don't go off on a tangent. I've also got a squeaky chair, which you may recognise from the home office. And yeah, so I'm super excited to be supporting you today with these ways to use NLP to feel less anxious. So hello if you're catching me live, hello if you're catching the replay, and hello if you're listening on the podcast. We are having record numbers download the podcast, so I'm super excited to be supporting you all. I popped a note in the show notes and in the chat above, which has got a link to our Change Your Mind, Change Your Life training, so do check that out as well. So let's dive into this. Through ways that you can use NLP to feel less anxious. Now, I want to just talk about anxiety, and I say this quite a lot, and about what anxiety is and how people perceive anxiety. Now, anxiety and feeling anxious is a natural emotion and a natural state that we can find ourselves in. Now, what people have tended to do is use anxiety as a kind of identity, and you hear people saying, my anxiety is feeling worse, or my anxiety, and they label it like it's an identity. And we don't ever say my anger or my sadness or my happiness, but we hear people say a lot, my anxiety. And one of the things that I want to talk about and address is that anxiety is like an emotion, like anger, sadness, fear, hurt, guilt, happiness, joy. It is an emotion like all of them other emotions are. And we all experience physical things when we feel anxious. So for example, we may feel our heart beating faster, we may feel our palms getting sweaty, we may feel our jaw clenching, and I'm using this from experience because I feel anxious sometimes just like everybody else, right? Or we may feel ourselves getting, a bit sweatier than normal, or we may feel like we've got a shortness of breath. These are quite normal experiences that we will experience when we feel anxious. Now let's think about happiness. What are the physical symptoms that we feel when we're happy? When we're really happy, now me, when I get really happy, sometimes I get a real shot of energy, and sometimes I feel like that in my chest. I can feel it in my chest. Or we might feel like we've got a feeling in our tummy when we're really happy, or we may feel like we're smiling, right? And our cheeks may start hurting because we're smiling so much. These are all physical experiences that we feel when we're happy. Let's talk about anger. When we feel angry, what are the physical symptoms, or what are the physical experiences that we have when we're feeling angry? Our jaws can clench, right? We may feel like, I don't know about you, but I start to stutter sometimes when I'm angry. It's very rare that I get angry, but if I ever do, I stutter, right? And that might not be a physical thing, but it is something that happens. Sometimes I feel it in my chest. Sometimes I get tense, and also we can all feel tense when we feel anxious as well. And these are all physical feelings that we get when we're feeling angry, right? So just like we get physical things and physical things that happen to us, and we experience physical things when we feel anxious, we also get that with all the other emotions as well, right? And I want to talk about this because often people think, well, I feel anxious and I'm feeling like I'm getting heart palpitations. Sometimes you can feel like that, or a tightening in my chest, or a shortness of breath. And the reason why I want to talk about this is because we get these and different symptoms with not symptoms, experiences and feelings and physical things that happen when we're experiencing different emotions as well, right? They're just maybe slightly different, or they may be the same, but they feel a bit different, right? So that's really important to think about, because just as other emotions, we feel them and we expect to feel them, we should also expect sometimes to feel anxious as well, because It's a normal, natural human emotion, right? So sometimes anxiety can feel a bit heightened than the other emotions. And sometimes the other emotions can feel heightened as well, but we are talking about anxiety today. So it is important to also get checked. I say this a lot as well because I experienced quite a lot of anxiety and a lot of anxious feelings in the past couple of years, which came down to a health reason. It was because of an overactive thyroid. So something like that is also important to check in if you are feeling more anxious than normal, and these things that we talk about don't help. It is also important to just go and see the doctor and speak to the doctor, because it could be a physical thing. It could be something that's going on with your body. And, you know, for that reason, anxiety is a call to action, right? So in the past, I felt quite anxious for no apparent reason. I've not really understood why. And when I've gone to the doctor, it appeared to be a call to action because I needed to get my thyroid checked because my thyroid levels, I was overactive, right? So that's important to think about as well. So let's dive into the NLP things that we can use when we're feeling more anxious, or when we're feeling anxious in general, right? So the first thing to do is to really acknowledge the feeling, right? Acknowledge the emotion and acknowledge that we're feeling anxious. Because what sometimes happens is we feel anxious, right? We feel anxious, and then we're like, oh my gosh, I feel anxious. How do I stop myself from feeling like this? How do I make it go away? And we want to stop it, right? And what happens is that can cause us to loop, because we feel anxious, we try and make the feeling go away, the feeling doesn't go away, so it feels worse. Then we start to feel guilty and have some negative self-talk, and we still feel anxious, right? So it can go in this negative spiral. And what can happen when we do that is that then can cause it to become the identity thing, because we're feeling anxious all the time, right? Because it's looping, because we're just trying to get rid of it all the time and not acknowledge it, right? We're not properly acknowledging this feeling and this emotion. And we need to, we're all human. We need to feel into our feelings and allow us to feel the feelings, right? So first thing, acknowledge the feeling and accept it. Accept the feeling. The second thing is really check in with you and why you're feeling anxious. So usually anxiety is a call to action, right? It's a call to action. So in the example that I gave you about the time when I felt anxious in the past more than normal, it was a call to action that I needed to get my thyroid checked, right? I didn't necessarily consciously know that at that time, but it was a call to action from the unconscious mind, that I need to take some kind of action, right? So sometimes the call to action can be that we're worrying about something, right? Sometimes the call to action can be that we're overthinking something. Sometimes the call to action can be that we maybe are stopping ourselves from doing something that we really want to do. Sometimes our call to action can be that we're doing something every day that we don't really enjoy. For example, if you don't enjoy your job, right, and you're going to work every day and you're not enjoying yourself and you don't enjoy what you're doing, that can cause you to feel anxious. And again, it's a call to action because you're consciously not allowing yourself to really honor how you really feel unconsciously. Okay, so because what happens is unconsciously you're having this conversation with yourself, and the conversation is going a little bit like this. Okay, I need to go to work today because I have to earn money to pay the bills and buy food and keep a roof over my head. And the unconscious mind is saying, yeah, but we don't really like going there. And the conscious mind is saying, yeah, but we need to pay the bills and have a roof over our head. And the unconscious mind is saying, I know, but can we find another way to do this? And the conscious mind is saying, no, there is no other way, right? And this can cause us to feel anxious. And it might not be this exact example, right? But that's just one example of how feelings of anxiety can arise, because there's an unconscious conversation going on that you're not consciously aware of, right? But you're taking the action that unconsciously you don't want to take, right? So that could be a relationship that you're not happy in. It could be a job that you're not happy in. It could be something that you're just not satisfied in life. It could be that maybe you used to do dance class and you loved it and you stopped going, right? It could be something that is quite simple like that your unconscious mind is saying, come on, let's sort this out, let's do this. But your conscious mind is blocking it, right? And it's stopping you from from being consciously aware of it, right? And stopping you from taking the action that you want to take. So really, like, just check in with yourself and ask yourself, like, the kinds of questions that are going to support you to find resources. Like, what is going on here? Okay, I feel anxious. Is there something that I'm not acknowledging in my life that I need to acknowledge? Yeah, and you may not find the answers straight away, and that's okay, but the key to this is really being curious. Okay, so instead of feeling anxious and trying to get rid of the anxiety feelings and physical experiences, and you're not working, you have a negative self-talk and beating yourself up about it to feel more anxious instead of this loop. Instead, what we're going to do is we feel anxious, we're going to accept that we feel anxious, we're going to acknowledge that we feel anxious, we're going to ask ourselves the questions like, what's going on here, and be really curious. And what will happen is, not necessarily, it won't necessarily go away straight away, but it will lessen the feelings because you're really diving deep into it and you're giving it the space, right? You're giving yourself the space to feel emotions, right? You're giving yourself space to feel, because that's all you're doing, right? Okay. So the first thing was to acknowledge the feeling. The second thing is to just really check in with yourself and become really curious. And the third thing then is, really, if there is something specific that you're feeling anxious about, so for example, you've got a test coming up, or you've got a meeting coming up, or a conversation that you're due to have that you need to have, and this is causing you to feel anxious. If that is the case, this is a really simple but powerful technique that you can use to really support yourself. So the reason why you're feeling anxious about this specific event, let's call it an event, right? So whether it's something that you need to do that you don't really want to do, or something's coming up, or there's something going on that you're not happy with, or that you feel like it's going to end badly, right? The reason why you feel anxious is because you're imagining it going wrong, right? You're imagining the worst possible case scenario. And whether you're consciously aware of this or not, you are most probably still imagining all the things that can go wrong with this situation. So what we can do is we can imagine ourselves and our timeline. So all of us have a timeline and the way that we store time, consciously and unconsciously. And unconsciously, we can find that our timeline is either front to back, or it can be side to side, right? And what you do is you just imagine your timeline. So imagine you've got a future and imagine you've got a past. And just imagine that they imply a line. Now this does, we do need to use some active imagination here, okay? And this does work at the conscious level and at the unconscious level, okay? So what you want to do is you want to float up above the timeline that you've just imagined and notice into the future where this event has happened. So just go just past the successful completion of this event that you may be worrying about or feeling anxious about or nervous or whatever, right? And notice that the feelings and the feelings of anxiety have reduced and released completely. And turn around and look at the successful completion of this event and notice that the feelings have gone. And if this isn't working, notice again the successful completion of the event and just notice that the feelings just evaporate. Okay? And then I want you to float back in on the timeline back into now. Okay? This is a really powerful technique because if you're feeling the feelings that you feel because you're nervous or anxious or worried about something, and we usually are just imagining the worst possible case scenario, right? And what we're doing here is we're really seeing successful completion of that. Okay, so if you cannot think about why you feel anxious, so if you cannot think of an event, then remember, feel into the feeling, check in with yourself, be curious. Just something as simple as placing your hand on your heart and allowing yourself to just breathe deeply into your heart and become really curious. Okay, what is going on here? I feel anxious. Acknowledge, accept, and give yourself the space to just feel the way that you feel. Okay, if you cannot imagine the event and nothing's coming up for you, meaning that you can't think of an event that you're worrying about or you're feeling anxious about, and you're becoming curious and it's still not evaporating, really check in with things that are just some stuff that is really simple, like caffeine. How much caffeine have you drank, right? things like, what have you eaten? What are you feeding yourself? And how much water have you drank? These things are really important, and so many of us dismiss them. So that's it from me. I hope that was helpful. As always, I'm Rebecca Lockwood, your neuro-linguistic programming trainer, hypnosis trainer, and breakthrough coach trainer. And I would highly recommend that you check out the Change Your Mind, Change Your Life free training series, which I've popped the link to above and in the show notes if you're listening to the podcast. So have an amazing week, and I'll catch up with you all again soon.